What happens when a nation is given just 48 hours to decide its fate while the entire world holds its breath? Right now, Ukraine faces exactly that moment. Moscow has delivered a relentless ultimatum. Ukraine must make a critical decision within 48 hours. This isn't just another battlefield maneuver. It's a pressure cooker where military victories and diplomatic brinkmanship collide, and the outcome could shape not just Ukraine's future, but the credibility of the West itself. Recent Russian breakthroughs near Pokrovsk, combined with devastating attacks on Ukraine's southern ports, have created a vice grip. Ukraine faces mounting losses on the ground and the slow suffocation of its economic lifelines. These events are not isolated. They're strategic, coordinated moves designed to corner Ukraine at its weakest. What's changed is not just on the battlefield. In Washington and across European capitals, the tone has shifted. Once unwavering in support, the United States and its allies are now quietly urging Kyiv to make pragmatic choices, even if that means accepting painful compromises. Behind closed doors, leaders realize that the old promises of endless aid and solidarity have limits, and time is running out. President Zelensky's recent peace overtures, even the suggestion of talks on the current front lines, are seen by many as an almost desperate act. In Western circles, some interpret these proposals as a veiled capitulation, a recognition that the cost of continued resistance may soon far outweigh the benefits. For Ukraine, the next 48 hours are about more than territory. The nation's identity, economic prospects, and the very trust of its allies hang in the balance. The stakes are enormous. This isn't only about lines drawn on a map, but about the world's willingness to uphold international order and the lessons every nation must learn about the price of slow decisions, shifting alliances, and the limits of idealism. To understand how Ukraine reached this breaking point, we need to trace the strategic moves and mounting pressures that built toward this fateful ultimatum. In recent weeks, a cascade of events has fused war and diplomacy into an inescapable knot. The crisis in Ukraine is no sudden eruption, but the result of a slow, purposeful tightening of pressure from every direction. It began with a dramatic Russian breakthrough near Pokrovsk, slicing open a key section of the front. At the very same time, massive strikes pummeled the port infrastructure of Odessa, a vital economic artery. This was not just a coincidence. It was a coordinated military pincer, squeezing Ukraine on both its land defenses and its capacity to trade and resupply. These simultaneous offensives shattered any illusion of stability for Kyiv. As news of the attacks spread, diplomatic channels lit up with urgency. Ukraine's leaders suddenly found themselves encircled, not just by advancing troops, but by a new wave of demands from foreign capitals. At the heart of this storm lies a brutal ultimatum, quietly crafted in Moscow and transmitted through international intermediaries. Its contents remain secret to the public, but to Ukrainian officials, it is chillingly real. The deadline is absolute, 48 hours to decide, while the battlefield situation visibly worsens by the hour. What makes the moment even more perilous is the months of strategic groundwork that led here. These moves were not frantic improvisations. They were calculated steps, each building on the last, each closing Ukraine's options with surgical precision. Logistics have been strained, ammunition stocks exhausted, and the morale of Ukraine's defenders pushed to its limits. Meanwhile, Western backing has begun to show its limits. Previously unthinkable compromises are now openly discussed in Washington, Berlin, and London. The sense inside Kyiv is that the circle is closing, and that even friendly capitals are nudging Ukraine toward decisions it had once sworn never to consider. Miss the underlying logic of this pressure campaign, and you risk misunderstanding everything that comes next. What appears as chaos is, in fact, a careful design, a demonstration of how power is wielded and how delay or denial can turn the smallest error into a catastrophe for a nation. But what exactly is in the ultimatum, and why does this moment feel so much more threatening than any that has come before? Now let us unpack the contents of this ultimatum and reveal why its terms have shocked even Ukraine's closest allies. This is not simply a threat. It is a coordinated, multi-dimensional squeeze that leaves almost no room for maneuver. To truly understand the ultimatum facing Ukraine, we have to look beyond the headlines. Moscow's demand is not a bolt from the blue. It is the logical outcome of months of incremental Russian advances and calculated port attacks, each one tightening the noose, one strategic move at a time. On the front lines, the situation is dire. Ukrainian forces are stretched thin, manpower has been exhausted, logistics are unreliable, and ammunition stocks are running dangerously low. The latest breakthrough near Pokrovsk did not happen by chance. It exposed the deep vulnerabilities in Ukraine's defenses and triggered this final phase of escalation. But the battle is not just on the ground. Russia's strikes on port infrastructure in the south, especially on the Black Sea, are about far more than military objectives. These are economic chokeholds, severing Ukraine's access to global trade, strangling its exports, and cutting off vital revenue streams. Every destroyed dock, every idle crane, is another turn of the screw, threatening Ukraine's ability to sustain itself as a functioning state. Against this backdrop, President Zelensky's public offer for immediate peace talks looks less like a negotiation tactic and more like a plea. Not long ago, Kyiv drew hard lines. No talks, no concessions, not one step back. Now, with the window for options shrinking with each passing hour, even compromise begins to look like capitulation. To make matters worse, Ukraine is finding itself increasingly alone. Western partners, once unwavering, are changing their tone. Where there were once pledges of open-ended support, there are now practical demands. Accept new realities, find a way to compromise, or risk being left to face the consequences alone. Messages from Washington, Berlin, Brussels, and London are clear but cold. The patience and unity that shielded Kyiv for so long are giving way to fatigue and strategic calculation. Every day of hesitation carries a heavy price. Ukraine is losing leverage, international support, and, most critically, territory. Delays now could seal the fate of entire regions, with consequences that may never be reversed. So, as the clock runs down and the options narrow, the question becomes unavoidable. What future is left for Ukraine, and what choices remain for its allies? The crossroads is here, and the world is watching. Next, we'll break down the possible scenarios facing Ukraine, each with its own risks, outcomes, and unpredictable twists. Every choice now reshapes not only Ukraine, but the very rules of power far beyond its borders. Let's map out the futures that lie ahead, each shaped by Ukraine's response and the decisions made in Western capitals. Accepting Russia's terms would mean national humiliation for Ukraine, likely the acceptance of severe territorial and political losses. Yet, it might be the only way left to preserve some form of statehood, at the cost of its dignity and independence. On the other hand, choosing continued resistance risks catastrophic losses, military collapse, economic devastation, and a future where Ukraine's very existence could be erased from the map. Right now, Moscow dictates the tempo and the terms. The military balance has shifted so sharply that Ukrainian and Western negotiators have almost no room left to maneuver. Every new day of delay cements new front lines, weakens Kyiv's bargaining position, and makes any future compromise even more painful. For Ukraine, the window to act, or to negotiate with leverage, is vanishing fast. But the stakes are greater than Ukraine alone. Western governments, from Washington to Berlin, now face choices with historic consequences. Will they escalate support and risk a direct confrontation with Moscow? Or will they pressure Kyiv into accepting painful compromises to avoid a wider conflict? Either path carries enormous risks, not just for the region, but for the entire international order. How this crisis is resolved will echo far beyond Eastern Europe. If Russia's strategy succeeds, it could embolden similar moves by other revisionist powers, showing that military force and economic strangulation can redraw borders and shatter sovereignties with impunity. The precedent set here could redefine how future geopolitical crises unfold. Who makes the rules, who enforces them, and at what cost for those who resist? Choosing wrong now could doom Ukraine's future, redraw the map of Europe, and empower new waves of coercion around the world. The world's confidence in collective security, in the promises of alliances and the warning signs of aggression, hangs in the balance. But is there a way to avoid these traps in the future, or to recognize the warning signs before it's too late? Let's explore what lessons this crisis holds for leaders and citizens everywhere. The ultimate playbook is not written on the battlefield. It is crafted in the slow drift of alliances, resolve, and timely decisions. Power in the modern world is rarely about brute force alone. It is wielded through information, through building and shifting alliances, and, most dangerously, by manipulating time itself. The most effective pressure campaigns unfold quietly, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of calculated moves and delayed responses. Look at Ukraine. The West's wavering support, its public statements outpacing concrete action, created dangerous ambiguity. Each hesitation, each delay, sent clear signals to Moscow. That escalation would not meet with unified, immediate resistance. This vacuum of resolve allowed Russia to tighten its grip militarily and economically, setting the stage for the ultimatum now faced by Kyiv. Negotiating under pressure almost always means negotiating from a position of weakness. By the time the ultimatum arrives, options have already narrowed. Leverage is not conjured in the final hour. It is built early, when lines can still be drawn and alliances can be solidified. For Ukraine, the shift in Western stance, from open support to calls for compromise, shows just how quickly the ground can shift beneath a nation's feet. But these are not just lessons for states. Individuals and organizations face their own versions of multidimensional pressure: market disruptions, shifting alliances, internal politics. The warning is universal. Do not wait until you are cornered. Read the signals early, act decisively, and build coalitions before the squeeze is on. If you ignore emerging patterns, you could find your best options gone before you even realize you are under attack. This is why understanding the interplay of military moves and diplomatic signals is not academic, it is survival. Today, Ukraine's situation is the result of months, even years, of missed opportunities and misread cues. Next time, the target could be any country, any business, or any individual who fails to recognize the warning signs soon enough. So the risk is not just about territory or politics, it is about learning from history before it repeats. If we do not, we risk becoming the next victim of coordinated, multidimensional pressure, whether on the world stage or in our own lives. But what exactly could have been done differently? And what choices remain when the clock is running out? Let's explore the forks in the road that might define Ukraine's future. The clock is ticking for Ukraine, but this lesson belongs to anyone who faces unseen pressure. What appears stable today may only be the quiet before a storm. Slow shifts in alliances, resources, or public opinion often signal deeper changes underway. If you wait until the ultimatum arrives at your own doorstep, it may already be too late. Ukraine's crisis is not simply a story of sudden aggression or betrayal. It is the product of countless small decisions, missed signals, and gradual changes: military setbacks, economic strangulation, and the subtle withdrawal of international support. Each step, barely noticeable at the time, has led to a moment of no return. That is the real danger for all of us. We are often lulled into complacency by routine or by reassurances that support will always be there, whether in politics, business, or personal relationships. But the reality is, the ground can shift beneath our feet while we are still arguing over yesterday's assumptions. Recognizing the warning signs and acting before opportunities are lost can mean the difference between survival and surrender. In Ukraine's case, the failure to adapt quickly, to read the warnings, has left the nation facing impossible choices and irreversible losses. For you, missing the cues could cost you time, reputation, or even the very things you thought were guaranteed. The world stage is unforgiving, and power always favors those who anticipate change, not those who hope it will simply pass them by. So, wherever you are, do not wait for the crisis to be obvious. Stay vigilant, question what seems stable, and be ready to act when the moment demands it. Because when the clock starts ticking, it is not just Ukraine at the crossroads. The same lesson applies to every person and every nation who wishes to write their own ending before someone else does it for them.